The groups are wrapped and the brackets are set. But also, we just got maybe the greatest game of Overwatch we've seen in a long time. Let's jump into it. Hey folks, my name is Apostle and welcome back to Watching Overwatch, also known as WoW. As we all know, Overwatch Esports can be hard to follow sometimes, so this is the show where I go over everything that's happened in the past week to make sure you can stay up to date. Now, fortunately, we did have a bit of a lighter week, but there is one thing that you absolutely cannot miss, and that is this week's must-watch match. This one's kind of two for the price of one, as what you absolutely need to see is the Asia finals stream. It was incredible to a level I can't even describe. We got both the lower bracket final and the grand final back to back, and the grand final in itself is one of the greatest series of Overwatch ever played, but even the lower bracket final was also incredibly close and incredibly exciting to watch. Just set aside some time, go watch the entire stream if you can. I promise you, you will not regret it. I got a link to it in the description right down below, so make sure you check it out. Now, for a second pick for the must-watch match, maybe you're not a fan of Asia, I will say SRP Check versus X Oblivione. Amazing match, really close. It was a revenge match for EXO versus a statement match from SRP Check. So fun to see these two teams clash, and I would absolutely recommend you watch that one too. Anyway, now let's jump into the main episode and start breaking things down. You know what? We're just gonna carry on with what we were talking about, the Asia Grand Finals, as like I said, they were just so incredible. Our lower bracket Grand Final saw Falcons beating Zeta in a crazy 3-2. Zeta and losing map 5s at this point, it's just become one of life's great constants along with death and taxes. This match had some incredible peaks, and you know, as with any match that we see Violet in, it also had some massive throws, but it was still incredibly close and so much fun to watch. A lot of people are saying that Bernard deserved an honorary player of the match despite the loss, and he really did play out of his mind, but really every player on Zeta just showed a phenomenal performance. Falcons is just that much better, you know, and Zeta, they just had too many missteps that eventually they piled up and couldn't really recover from it. Like, I know everybody loves to talk about Violet being the GOAT, but there are so many times when he just has decisions or plays that are borderline unrecoverable, and here it became a little bit too much. I'm not saying he played badly, but his tendencies to make some questionable plays did kind of bite them here, and if he didn't, who knows how things would have gone. I will say, despite the fact that we've known this for a while now, but this match really is just such a huge indicator that Asia needs 3 slots minimum. I would say 4, but at least 3, just so we have Zeta able to make it in, because these matches are always so close, and like, it's honestly kind of heartbreaking that we had Pelican come back into the scene, show that he's still top tier, hanging with these top teams, and now he's still going to have to miss Stockholm because of the format that we have here. My boy Pelican deserves to go to LAN, okay? But anyway, with Falcons taking that neck-and-neck game, they got into the grand finals against Crazy Raccoons. And this ended up becoming a series that people are calling one of the top 5 matches of all time, and easily the best match of Overwatch we've seen since the Overwatch League ended. Falcons beat Crazy Raccoons in a 4-3, a map 7 giga banger, something that is so rare, but every time it happens is so good. And I mean, who else would it come from other than these two teams, Falcons and Crazy Raccoons? Every time they face off, it's two titanic forces colliding. I touched on this in the last episode too. These teams are just so insane, and they never fail to exceed our expectations. So for anyone who's ever been a proper doubter, just go watch this series and you'll understand what the hype has always been about. He was kind of putting Heesang in the ground when it came to the Genji mirror. We saw Lip on Cass, who was straight up controlling the server with the amount of headshots he was hitting. Hanbin brought back the Junker Queen, and he showed why he won a title on that hero. And Stalker, I think he might have put on the greatest performance that we've seen from him yet, which I think at this point has solidified his title as an S-tier Hyperflex right alongside Proper. And this is something I've said before, but Falcons, it's inarguable that they have the most flexible DPS line in the world, and I don't even think it's close. Like, Heesang and Lip, sure, they're better at some of the more individual heroes, but when it comes to flexibility and an ability to adapt to whatever is needed and just like swap roles on the fly, Falcons are just untouchable in that department. Also, I don't want to see anyone trashing Smurf ever again, because I don't know what more this guy has to do to prove he's still a GOAT, but he kept up with every single other player in that lobby. He was subbed in, subbed out, and he didn't miss a beat a single time. He is easily on the level of everyone else there, and he deserves the same respect the rest of them get, okay? I would guess that what really set these teams apart here was Fielder and Chio were just a bit more comfortable in the Juno comps than Churong and Shu were. Now, make no mistake, it was neck and neck, of course, but Crazy Raccoons, they were kind of trying to do like a Shanghai-style meta break here, right? Which is something that we've seen so many times from Moon back on the Shanghai days. Whereas Falcons, they really leaned into the meta, which which of course is something that we've seen Krusty do a lot. So I think it was really cool to see the respective styles of these two different coaches, both legendary in their own right, but they finally clashed here, and Krusty ended up coming on top this time. But yeah, if you haven't seen this match yet, go watch it. Even if you just watched through all this and now you know the scoreline, you're spoiled, still go watch it. The individual plays you will see, the level of skill that was getting displayed is so worth it. You will not regret it. Anyway, Asia finally done. Now let's talk about what's happening over in OWCS, EU, and NA. So in OWCS, our group stages have wrapped up, and well, you know, we saw a lot of elimination matches here. I'm gonna be honest, not the closest games ever. We had one close game, but overall, it was kind of one-sided, which I don't think is the worst thing ever, since that does mean that in the brackets, we should have some pretty top quality teams coming in here now. Starting off with the EMEA, first day saw SRP Czech take a clean 3-0 win over Hypnos. Hypnos, they were always gonna be the underdogs against SRP Check, right? In a little bit of a surprising result, we saw Negative Mental Attitude take a 3-1 win over Gambit. Now, the reason I say this is surprising is because Gambit, they had some fairly decent performances in the FaceIt League, but it seems like they just couldn't bring it out here in OWCS. Now, the one that does irk me a little bit is Vendetta. They were able to take a 3-1 win over Quick Esports. Now, I will say, this is closer than the scoreline implies, okay? There are a lot of worlds where Quick could have taken this match if we see things go a little bit differently. I don't want to say they snatched defeat from the jaws of victory, but there were a few moments where Quick just, you could feel they were choking. We saw a real heartbreaking C9 on Kings Row. Just looking at the clip, you can see it's one of the worst we've had in a while. Not necessarily anyone's fault, as I'm sure they thought they were on the point there when the overtime window could have been triggered, but they won the fight, and if they were able to capture that point there, maybe they win the map, maybe that sets up momentum, who knows how things go. Of course, though, that's not to discredit Vendetta's success, as I do need to eat my words a little bit. Hybrid, he's starting to look a lot more comfortable on the main tank. I think part of that might be because he's able to play Orisa a lot more. His Winston, I still don't know if I'm a fan of, but the Orisa, I think it probably translates a lot better for someone who's been a DPS player. And also, I gotta give a shout out to Cookie. He was kind of going crazy, especially he pulled out a Widowmaker and he was kind of dominating on that. He was really controlling Quick at several key points in the match. So honestly, Vendetta, they are looking strong. I underrated them, and you know what? I apologize. I wasn't familiar with your game. Now, our second day started off with a one-man army taking a 3-1 win over Peps. Now, of course, this was both teams taking a rematch, and it was a lot more one-man army favorite this time. We saw great performances come out from Top Dragon, Ice, and really just everyone on that team. Like, Alma, they are trying to be a top 4 team, and I think winning this map dominantly is something that they needed to do to really kind of prove that. Now, our next match, this was the one nail-biter that we did see come out of group stage, and that was SRP Czech versus Oblivion. Now, SRP Czech was able to take a 3-2 win here over EXO, but this really was a very back and forth match. One of the biggest things that stood out to me here is Daned. He had kind of a legacy performance this game. Now, the guy has been around the scene for so long, and he used to be on British Hurricane and was known as like one of the best DPS in EU, right? And I think today he showed why he had that legacy. He pulled out the Venture and he was looking incredible. He forced out a lot of resources that otherwise I think would have been used to really start denying Cloudy and Ghost value. And by pulling out all those resources, he enabled the rest of SRP Czech to have a lot more freedom when it came to playing the style that they wanted to play so much. Now, while I'm sure this was a heartbreaking loss for Oblivione and the players, I hope they're not too disappointed, as really I think this probably came down to just like an experience diff, right? SRP Czech has players who have been around for so long. Their mentals, I'm sure, are rock solid, and they were able to bounce back from that 0-3 loss with some good adaptation, some good strategy, and it ended up working perfectly for them in this match. And Oblivione, I'm sure that give these players time to grow and develop, and they will be able to compete with that no problem. Overall, very good match. Definitely the best one we got outside of Asia this weekend. Now, for our final match, we saw Twisted Minds get a 3-0 over Negative Mental Attitude. This one I was expecting to be a little closer considering the result the first time these teams played, but I'm not gonna lie, Quartz, he kind of just decided to win. And you know, when an Ashe is just double dinking half your team, it's really hard to play against that. Like, no fault to NMA for that, right? So with those matches wrapped up, this is what our bracket looks like. We see Ents facing off against a one-man army there in that first round, which is really unfortunate for a one-man army. Obviously, if they want to make it into that top 4, fighting against a top 2 team right off the bat does make things pretty hard, but you know, I'm hoping they can still show us a good performance. Anyway, that covers the EMEA, so now let's talk about what's going on in North America. Now, our first day saw Avidity take a 3-0 over O3 Splash, and this one was kind of a gimme as O3 Splash is an off-meta team, right? It's a little bit surprising they even made it out of Swiss. right? The fact that they made it into groups, that was farther than anyone was expecting, but against like a real team or a team that's like really taking it seriously, this was the inevitable result. Next, we saw Team Z take a 3-1 win over Absolution. Also kind of expected. Now, don't get me wrong, Absolution, absolutely nothing wrong with them. They're a solid team, but you know, just not quite on that level yet. Now, our next match, which again is one I was expecting to be closer than it actually was Shikigami taking a 3-1 win over YFP. Now, I will say, Solo, he had an incredible game this match. He's really making a name for himself as one of the better North American tank players. He's on the up and up, and he's showing no signs of slowing down, and I'm excited to see what he has in store. I do gotta say though, the Taejon, Sunjon DPS line is looking kind of crazy. These guys, they were very flexible, very talented. They just kind of got outpaced by these guys, and Shikigami, with that win looking so strong, they're looking like a pretty real contender for that top half of teams. Now, our second day saw NRG taking a 3-0 over Blastoff Buds. Now, this match, Tree, he was looking kind of unstoppable. Again, the Ashe just so strong when you're hitting headshots. But the real thing that stood out to me this match was Attack was in playing Orisa, and I'm not gonna lie, he was kind of on fire. Despite the fact that he's normally an off-tank player, and we still kind of think of Orisa as a main tank, if Attack keeps playing like he did here, who knows how far up NRG could punch. Like, he was looking really, really good. Next up, we saw Avidity take a 3-1 win over Ramatra Punch. Now, this match, it was kind of funny, because Avidity, what they decided to do was just go on a full counter comp, right? Ramatra Punch, they run the Reinhardt. That's just what they do. They always run the Reinhardt. So Avidity, they were just like, okay, we're just gonna play Bastion Orisa. Like 99% of the time, they would just ran the Bastion, busted down the shield, made Derpy's life a living hell. Like, oh dude, you could tell he was so miserable. He was just getting speared constantly, javelin spinned away from the front line. The Bastion was just putting pressure down, so he really couldn't take a single frontline fight properly. I would almost say that Avidity was bullying a little bit, but you know what? Like, these teams, they're playing to win, right? And if the comp works, then it works. And I will say, it's a smart move from the coaching staff. Like, could you play the meta and beat them? Sure, probably. But if you have the chance to just counter comp and beat them even more easily, you might as well do that, right? But anyway, our final match saw TSM taking a clean 3-0 win over Team Z. And the standout for this game was Squid. He decided to actually play a lot of Zenyatta this match, which, you know, we don't see a ton of, but he was actually putting in work. He was doing a ton of damage, finding early picks with his volleys. He also pulled out the Ilyari on King's Row, and they had a fairly funny strategy. He kind of just threw up his healing pylon onto that hallway on high ground. Vision just played around it constantly, and it was literally just the pylon pocketing him while Squid was off-angling playing as a third DPS. And you know what? It worked. So TSM, obviously, I think they were favored to win either way, but Squid, he definitely helped them make it look as dominant as it was. Anyway, this is what our bracket looks like here for North America. Now, looking at this bracket, I think like the top teams are kind of all favored to win here, right? Toronto Defiant, you take over NRG. Citrus, you probably take over Avidity, though I think there is a good chance for Avidity to play that game close. But in the lower bracket and in the semifinals, I think we should see some really close matches here. So exciting stuff. Anyway, OWCS is out of the way, so I do want to touch briefly on FaceIt League. Season 3 is starting up now and our teams are confirmed. So looking over at the EMEA side of things, this is what we have. Now, obviously, a lot of the top names that we'd expect to see are here, but you know, there are a couple new ones that sneaked in. Reyes, Mythical Minions, and Gas T3. We also see Celtis make a return after they failed to make groups in OWCS. Now, only a few matches have been played, so not much to go in depth on, but some interesting stuff is Ex Oblivione, they actually beat Team Peps in a 3-2 score. So I think that goes to show that EXO, while they did have a bit of a rough group stage, they are still a very good team. Can't underrate them by any means. The surprising one, if you ask me, is Gas T3. They were actually able to beat Quick Esports. Now, to be honest, I'm not sure how this happened, because looking at their rosters, Gas has a lot of players that I'm honestly not familiar with, whereas Quick, they have a lot of players that I'm familiar with, I'm fans of, I rate very highly. The fact that they lost is pretty surprising to me, but maybe Gas, they're hidden gems, so let's keep an eye on them and see what they do. Now, over in North America, every one of these teams here is a team we recognize. Tanuki Esports is like the main team of Tanuki Tapire, which was the team that we did see make it into groups. And you'll also notice that we actually have a collegiate team as UCI have joined the fray. UCI, very solid team. They typically perform very well in Overwatch Collegiate. So pretty cool to see them participating in a non-collegiate tournament. And seems like they're off to a pretty good start as they actually were able to beat Shikigami in a 3-1, which again, Shikigami, like I've been saying, they're a good team. So I think this is a pretty surprising result but you know, it is FaceIt League, right? So we'll take the results with a grain of salt. Shikigami probably focusing more on the playoffs that they're in instead of the first match of FaceIt. Anyway, with that done, let's talk about players and roster moves here. Now we have a big roster change for Tanuki Tapire, team that I just mentioned, as they've actually signed the Extinction Zenith core. Extinction Zenith obviously were eliminated in groups, but a few of those players have now been picked up by Tanuki here, as well as a few new pieces to kind of round out the roster. Now, I think Tanuki Tapire was fine with that ASU core, but, you know, they want to change some stuff around, so I'm excited. We'll see how it goes. Now, another team that we just talked about, O3 Splash, they've actually disbanded after failing to get out of groups in OWCS, and that's actually partly why we're seeing UCI in the FaceIt League, as O3 Splash were originally the ones to qualify. It was a kind of fun team to watch, but let's be honest, they were kind of a mean team. I don't think anyone expected them to stick around for the long term. Now, next, in some news that we've kind of suspected for months, I received official confirmation from an inside source that Dove and Dynasty, they have officially retired. Now, for anyone who's been around the scene a long time, you'll definitely recognize these names as they are contenders classics. They were really iconic players for teams like Odyssey and Revival, and they actually made up the DPS duo for Uprising Academy for a bit. Even though these players, they were never maybe considered the best in the world or anything, they were still very solid and just longtime constants of the scene. And you know, now that they are officially retired, it is a little sad to see that old guard kind of fading away, but you know, I'm sure we'll see new talent rise up and take their place. Now, our next kind of exciting roster here is Compare Cat. This is a Chinese team that actually has a pretty cool roster. We see Aprita and Becky on the TPS line, which I think is actually pretty exciting. Langsa has been signed, which is kind of weird given that scandal going on with him. Maybe that's been resolved, I don't know. But on the other hand, they have Molly to kind of round that line, and Molly, that's pretty cool, right? We saw him in Overwatch League, and I think is a really talented player that we really never got to see the full potential of. So you know what, maybe this is their chance to show what they're made out of. Now you may notice here, it does list Spectra as a sub. Don't get too excited, as pretty much like right after this roster announcement came out, Spectra decided he was actually gonna bow out from the team, so he's not actually on the roster anymore. But anyway, this team will likely be competing in the Pro Chaser Association. Now, the Pro Chaser Association is a Chinese tournament that is actually organized by Chen, who you might recognize as a Chinese caster and a coach. He coached Chengdu Hunters for a little bit. Now, there is little to no English coverage of this, which is why it's really hard to talk about. And, you know, the game itself is still not officially re-released in China, but it is kind of exciting to have a tournament going on there. We do see that Team CC and Team XX will be competing in it, but there is still no clue what their rosters will look like. And also, this is maybe an opportunity for us to see you once again compete. Now, let's talk about what we got coming up next. And honestly, our next up segment is going to be a little short and sweet this time around, as all we really have happening is our OWCS NA and EU playoffs. Now, EU will be starting at 12 p.m. Eastern every day from October 10th to October 12th, and then it'll be starting at 1 p.m. on October 13th. NA is basically the same story, except it's going to be starting at 5 p.m. Eastern each and every day. I think we have really exciting brackets on both sides of the region, so make sure you tune in for that. Anyway, that's going to wrap up the episode for this week. Maybe not the closest games coming out from the group stage, but I think it does set us up for some really exciting brackets, like I've mentioned. I think that means that the gap between the top teams and the bottom teams, that's slowly closing in, and we're going to be seeing the competition getting tighter and tighter. And, you know, of course, even if those matches weren't the closest, we did see that Asia final, which was just incredible. Maybe the best match of Overwatch ever played. You'll have to watch it to judge for yourself, but it was absolutely peak. But yeah, make sure you check out the playoffs for OWCS. But hey, even if you can't catch all the games, no need to worry, because that's what I'll be here for. Thank you all so much for watching. Hope you enjoyed. Take care.